All right, we're calling this annual district budget meeting to order at 7:05. Would anyone, we don't have an attendant, would anyone like to nominate a moderator for the meeting?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Jen White.
All in favor? Aye. All right.
Notice of annual district meeting. Notice is hereby given to all those entitled to vote in towns meetings in the towns of Bridgewater, Roxbury, and Washington that a district meeting will be held on Monday, May 1st, 2017 at 7 o'clock at Chippewa Valley School, 159 South Street, Washington, Connecticut, to present for approval the annual budget for the 2017-18 year prepared by the Regional Board of Education for Chippewa Valley Regional School District 12, copies of which are on file with the respective town clerks of the district and at the central office of the Board of Education. Chippewa Valley Regional School District 12, Bridgewater, Roxbury, Washington, by James Hirschfield, Chairman, Board of Education, Washington Depot, Connecticut, 06794. I will now turn the meeting back over to the Board of Ed.
Thank you very much. All right. So, presentation of the budget in the amount of $21,387,146 in accordance with Section 1051 of General Statutes. Do I
have to read the whole
I have to read this before we adjourn. Okay. So the budget meeting this evening is to be considered adjourned until the following day, Tuesday, May 2nd, 2017, until polls open in each of the three-member towns for the purpose of voting the question. The meeting shall then be considered as adjourned following the close of the polls in the three-member towns and announcements made of the results of voting the question. Bridgewater, Town Clerk Cheryl Pincos. Senior Center, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., phone number 860-354-5102. Roxbury, Town Clerk Peter Hurlbut. Town Hall, 29th North Street, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Telephone number 860-354-3328. Washington, Town Clerk Sheila Anson. Town Hall, Bryan Memorial Plaza, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Telephone number 860-868-2786. Can we, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right, we adjourn this meeting at 7:08, it appears. Thank you very much. All right, so we will now proceed to our regular Board of Ed business meeting at 7:08. Rebecca, if you could call the roll.
Anthony Amato. Here. Valerie Anderson. Here. Alan Brown. Here. Gregory Cava. Here. I'm here. Michelle Gora.
Here.
James Hirschfield. Stephanie Kolnick. Here. Jennifer Pody. Here. Lisa Rausch. Michael Sinatra.
Here.
Peter Tagley.
Here.
Yes?
Could I ask that we, I'd like to make a motion to place an item on the agenda under old business to try to get a motion for the. Oh, that's what that means. Nice. For the tuition reduction for the elementary schools. It's been a couple of months, and I think we need to move on that for marketing.
I know that was discussed in the Finance Committee. Valerie?
We did discuss it, and I'll be happy to give that in my report.
Yeah,
Somebody has to
so
second
do
the
we have a
motion.
second for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay. And then, all in favor of adding the tuition request to the agenda under old business, it would be 7.2. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Against?
People need to raise their hands.
All right, wait, could we raise your hands? All in favor? All right, it looks like a unanimous. Okay, so we will add that to the agenda under old business 7.2, a discussion of the tuition. All right. The second item on our agenda, opportunity for the public to comment on agenda items. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to the agenda? No? Okay. Seeing no one, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Did everyone have a chance to look at the minutes? Everyone is fine. If I ask a question about something on the consent agenda, does it then take it off the consent agenda? Yes. That's what I thought. I'll ask later. Everyone's good? All right, so that is all approved. The next is report of the chair. We have a little special recognition for Rebecca Devine, who has served on our school board, but is unfortunately leaving us because she is moving. So a little something from the board. Thank you very much for your service, and you have some big shoes to fill. It'll be hard to fill those. So I guess that there's not much else to report. Jim's not here tonight. He's attending the graduation of his daughter from vet school, so that is very exciting. And I just wanted to congratulate the administration on the successful newsletter. It is beautiful. I haven't finished reading it. I got about halfway through, but I plan on doing that. They did a very nice job. I think it looks great. So good job with that. That I think is it for me. Go ahead.
Okay. This week, it just happens to be on the same week, it's Teacher Appreciation and Nurses Appreciation. So I just want to say thank you to our nurses who do a great job, and to our teachers, which encompasses a lot of people. It's not just teachers, it's counselors, it's administrators, it's educational paras, it's interventionists. There's so many adults who work with our kids on a regular basis and do a great job. They're dedicated, they're hardworking, and they just are wonderful. So I just want to say thank you for all you do, and we do appreciate your hard work, and we hope you get a lot of appreciation this week from your students and the families that you serve. I want to let you know that we have an appointment of Amanda Schrock as a paraprofessional at WPS, and reduction in force. These, by contract, we have to let teachers know by May 1st if they will be losing their position, and we do have 3 teachers. Kylie Heffert at WPS, Nicole Martone at SVS, and Adam Nanavatni right now has lost 0.6 of his position. He's deciding whether or not he wants the 0.4 position. And of course, that's all contingent on the budget. I do want, question about that? Yeah.
Yep. I was just wondering, because I know we have to notice the teachers when they're, because of the date. But do we know if we have people retire? Is it definitely, if we have someone retiring, are these positions, these were the last hired, this is according to the contract, the union contract, but.
The only position that right now that we were able to keep was because we have a teacher going out on maternity leave at Burnham. So we were able to not lay off someone, so that was good news. Right now, I don't know of anyone who's retiring. So if someone did retire and these people, one of these people was certified, they would get the position,
Okay,
okay?
okay, thank you.
So, yeah. It's a very hard thing to do. Very hard thing to do. That's why I'm so hopeful for the agri-science program, because that will allow us to keep our staff. It's a very scary time for staff members when they see declining enrollment, because they don't know if they're going to have positions. I want to say that Karen and I are working on a visit from the local real estate agents from our area and the surrounding towns. On May 16th in the morning, you'll get an invitation. We will have a little breakfast for them. We'll give them a tour. We'll invite the elementary principals. We're inviting the PTOs, the selectmen, selectwomen, so that they can see how wonderful our schools are, give them some information to take back to their offices. So when families do come into their offices, they're able to share all about Region 12. Excited about that. I also want to tell you how proud I am of our newsletter. I think it is gorgeous. I love the cover. I love the stories. I love the pictures. I just love it. I love the whole thing, honestly. And I also, I really was very impressed with our postcard. I don't know how many of you got it, but the postcard was beautiful. And you can keep the postcard and use it on the other side where it just says Chapag. It's really, if you could put that in a frame, look at it, it's beautiful. I think so too. And I want to just take a minute. I had the pleasure to attend a senior project last week where Maddie Gora and everybody in Maddie's family and Tara Flaherty, and they all had their hair cut for St. Baldrick's. And Maddie went bald, and her dad went bald, and Tara Flaherty went almost bald. And they raised over $25,000. And as a superintendent, I am more than proud, but as just someone who has the opportunity to work with Michelle and her family and know her kids, I mean, what a tribute to your family. Just unbelievable. It was an unbelievable day here in Chapag. It really was. I can't explain to you how great it was. And I know I received, and there was a big article in the News Times, a full page, colored pictures, so you need to get those papers from there.
Oh, there's some
I'm
extras.
sure they're there, because I have one in my office for you. But it's on the Cube, so if you haven't seen it, you know. And I have to tell you, Maddie looks gorgeous. I should look as gorgeous as she does. Bald. I mean, she is gorgeous. Just unbelievable. So congratulations, really.
Thank you.
Wonderful, just wonderful.
Thank you.
And senior project time is coming, so we'll be proud of all of our kids, because they all do a great job. And I know they had their trip this weekend, and I know they all went, I know they all came back, and I saw on Facebook Mrs. Gallo flying through the air on something. I don't know what she was doing, but, you know. Yeah, I have no idea. But it looked like fun, and I'm glad she's back and able to walk. So with that said, I want to remind everybody to get out the vote tomorrow. We have our referendum, and we do have board member seats up, so please remind your friends and family to vote early and vote often. Okay, that's a joke. That is a joke.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to just quickly say that I was so proud of the Chapag community on the day of the Maddie's senior project, because the faculty and the students, everyone was so supportive. And they got it. They understood the purpose and were very, it was a wonderful time to be a part of this entire community. And I felt really grateful to be a part of it. So thanks to everyone. I think you know, that atmosphere of support starts in pre-K through what we do, trying to teach our children to be good citizens and to support each other. And that was really evidenced on that day. So thank you very much. All right, committee reports.
I have
Yes.
a comment. Once again, I do want to thank you for this. Your timing is exquisite, because we in the town of Washington have been bombarded with a lot of mailings telling us that Region 12 has poor academic performance and fiscal mismanagement, and that's just one of the comments made again and again in the newspapers, letters to the editor, different mailings. It's horrible. As a board member, we should be supporting the schools, not denigrating the schools. And this hopefully shows our population what we're all about, because frankly, 3 of the 4 candidates that are running for board haven't been up here. So how do they know, except for great mailings like this? End of politics.
All right, committee reports, building, Greg?
Oh, going right into it.
Yes, the building committee met, I think it was last week, if I'm not mistaken. And we are now at the point where Castle Booz, the architect, is through the schematic design phase. Those always require a few minor tweaks and adjustments and whatnot. We have not seen the final schematic design because it wasn't quite finished at our meeting, but we should have that fairly soon. And then we continue with the project, and that's more or less where we are. And we're on target on funds and everything as to where that is. So it continues to move forward.
Great. I just have a question, because I'm trying to remember when the board, I can't remember if it's the last sort of schematic has come to the board since it was last changed. I had a question. I thought something was moving that wasn't, there were so many changes trying to meet those deadlines for Department of Administrative Services. Have we seen the last ones, or is it continually changing? Is it not really worth
Well,
bringing to us every 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's not worth bringing to you every 2 weeks at this point. I mean, the basic design of it has not changed in a while. We have a single greenhouse. It's larger than either of the 2 greenhouses when we had 2 or the 3.
Right.
But we've moved that into a single program. The corner of the building up here is no longer part of AgStem. That facility is going to remain. We've pared down the facility to the smallest point that it's been. The program is not affected. It's 100% of the program with a smaller facility. And you've seen those plans.
Okay.
The last set of plans you saw are basically it. What gets tweaked in the schematic system is whether they need a slightly larger, slightly smaller electrical cabinet, whether that has to move from here to there. One of the things that the AgStem and Science Project will do, and don't forget, we're still working on the Science Project as well as part of this. It's going to come into this media center. We're using more of the square footage of the building. And if you can imagine, if you see fiction on this diagonal wall and fiction on its opposite number, basically from the T in fiction across, straight across the library here, all of that's going to be incorporated into science.
Okay.
And so that's pretty much the plan that we have been
remember
looking
that.
at. Yeah. So that we're going to be using that. And it's going to require some relocations of some things. For example, the robotics room is going to be relocated. Kim and her staff are coming up with a plan on where that's going to be.
Because there are some classrooms.
There are 2 classrooms that are going to be put into the science wing. And that moved somewhat into the building because we moved some of the AgStem into that wing. Some of the AgStem science classrooms are now in that wing. And that's been in the plan for the last 2 or 3 iterations. So we got down to the point of looking how it was going to impact things in the building and what it was going to look like. So that's sort of where we are. And I don't know if there's anything else that you had specific questions on, if I can remember.
No, I think it was site work. We were talking about the tennis courts, but it's really not that important.
Well, it is important because the tennis courts have been pulled out of the project. They're not going to be done as part of the project, and those tennis courts are going to have to be redone.
Yeah, they're bad.
They're
They have
in
big
bad-
chunks in 'em.
Well, we knew that, and because we haven't done anything, we haven't done any large maintenance projects on those, because it was assumed that they were going to have to be relocated as part of AgStem, so they were going to be rebuilt. So there was no point in rebuilding something that was going to be torn out in a short period of time, but as the time has gone on, the condition has gotten worse, and now we're going to have to budget for that on a going forward basis to repair those tennis courts or replace those tennis courts in place.
Resurface.
Yeah,
at least.
resurface and whatnot,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's,
All right, so they were pulled out. All right, so it is changing. What is the next step?
well, the next step is more or less is Castle Booze continues the work that it does under its contract, and we're waiting to see what the legislature does. I mean, the session is supposed to officially end in the first week in June, but it may or may not end in the first week in June.
Are we on target, though, for where we wanted to be for when June came?
Yeah, we are on target, although it's getting increasingly, if we end up with any further holdups, it gets increasingly difficult to deliver it in August
Right.
of 19. 19, yeah, 19. And so we're kind of at the point where we really have got to keep it on track, or we're going to, it's going to be delayed in its delivery.
Okay.
Sort of where we are.
Yeah, all right.
We do have a meeting Monday at May 8th at 6 PM. So of course, any board member who'd like to come, more than welcome.
I haven't been to one in a while. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Education curriculum. Our next meeting will be the 15th, I believe it is, education meeting. And Teresa and staff will be presenting on STEM, pre-K-12. They'll be talking about the new science frameworks. They'll be talking about makerspace. They're bringing students, so it should be really exciting. So I'm looking forward to that. And I apologize for missing the last one, the last meeting. I heard it was, yeah, I heard it was great. I watched most of the video. I haven't finished it, but the professional development and special ed, a lot of great information there. So thank you for everyone who attended that. Michael, did you have anything to add?
Just the next one after that, and I believe our last one was year 12, right?
Correct. And
Building here, too.
yep, and that'll be the state of the schools, which is our typical closing education topic. All right, at Advance, we have a meeting this week, and I will be attending for the first time in a little while. Yeah, I can actually make it. No tennis match that night. So, yeah, so it's been a little while, and it's a good time. There will be, I was just looking at the agenda, kind of going over the, sort of reviewing the year and how the year went. So that should be pretty informative. All right, facilities, Greg?
Yes, the Facilities Committee will be meeting on the night of our next board meeting. So we haven't met, we did not meet last month. The meeting was canceled because Mr. O'Leary was not here. So we canceled that meeting, and we're going to go forward and continue to discuss what will be done in the schools during the summer and you know, the program for improving things. And I think we're going to have to start talking about how we're going to, and how and when we're going to deal with issues like the tennis courts and others that have to be done. But we continue to make improvements in the school. You know, you've noticed that the appearance has changed of the high school, and we continue to carry that project forward to get this working. The teachers area is slowly but surely seeing additions and whatnot to it, but we're just about there.
Great, thanks.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
The next meeting, which is the 15th, is going to be at 6:30 because we're honoring our volunteers. So maybe the facilities committee could be at 5:30 if that's possible. We can talk about it, Greg, but I just want to remind the board members it's at 6:30 on the 15th.
On the 15th, I'm just looking at our agenda with future meetings, and that's
Yeah, it's not correct.
what it
It's
says.
not
Okay,
correct.
so if we all want to
Yeah.
just, I did not realize
We'll
that.
send an email out.
Okay, because we'll
Yeah,
adjust
Debbie
policy
just
as well.
reminded me, yes.
Okay,
Some of us will be here early anyway.
yes, we'll be here. All right, long-range plan, Alan? Oh, wait, sorry, I missed one. And were there any other questions for facilities? No. All right, finance, Valerie.
We met just prior to this, I'm sorry. I've been listening to some videos, the replay, and these microphones are really important. It's really interesting to me, and I can't stand listening to myself, nor watching myself. Anyway, we met prior to this meeting, and I'll wait. We went over the March 31st financial report, as we usually do, and the only item of interest is the fact that we have encumbered legal auditing and professional services. We kind of went overboard at $636,000 in the negative, making that entire object area, the 300s, in the negative, but that's because Bob rightly is recognizing the costs as we proceed in the ag STEM, and hopefully down the road a piece, some of that money might come back in the way of grant. So there were no real concerns about the financial report, and I missed the first page, is that right now, as of the 31st rather, of March, we stand at a remaining in the black $62,000 or 0.3% of the budget. In my comings and goings, I told the town leaders of hopefully all 3 towns should know that this board has returned back to the towns at the last 11 budget years about $1.6 million of unexpended funds after our 1% allocation, after our $100,000 lease allocation. So, you know, basically keeping our eye on that bottom line has really paid off, I think, and some real goodwill with the member towns. Then, at the Finance Committee meeting, we had 2 big discussions tonight, one of which is the promise that we made at Finance to review the tuition request, and we can talk about that later, so I'll kick that down the road. We did a quick review of the AgriScience Science Lab cash flow, what it looks like, though none of this will be finalized for a while. And then I want to say that the $377,000 that I have talked about recently of expended funds for Ag STEM is now standing at $380,000, with another commitment of 120. I don't have my notes in front of me. 128,000 pending, for a total that we will have outstanding, paid and outstanding, about 527,000. So there's some misinformation in the community that we've already spent over $1 million. We have not. But we have to get ready for bidding, and we have had to work with DAS quite a bit and follow their lead. Let's see, what else? Then we talked with the leaders of of Roxbury, and I had a private, just a drop-in conversation with Mark Lyon, first selectman of Washington, about where they think we should go on the request by the first selectman of Bridgewater on a reconfiguration, which might lead to a change in the regional plan. And the decision was this takes more study, more input. Roxbury's not wild about this right now, so we're just going to keep monitoring this. We could actually keep adding it to the Finance Committee agenda as we get more into it in the summer months. Whoever is treasurer can take a look at these costs and see where we're going. And definitely what we need is a meeting of the town's selectmen to talk about it more in earnest. The ball is in their court. So at least we have done what we said we would do. We gave it an airing, and we'll continue to do so. And that was it, except doubling back to tuition later.
Thank you. Any questions for Valerie on finance?
Yeah, was this a formal meeting? I noticed that was Curtis invited to this meeting when you discussed this, or could he not attend?
It was on the agenda.
But I mean, I noticed that the Roxbury selectmen were here. And
Right.
you said you talked to,
Well, they came.
right.
The Roxbury selectmen, or representatives of the board, came, and because this was a published public notice, certainly we were hoping, I was surprised, frankly, that no other selectmen came to our meeting.
But they must have been notified in some way, because usually selectmen don't pore over all the agendas for our agendas. So someone must have invited them.
Well, Mark didn't come.
No, he
No, I
didn't
mean,
come.
we're beginning a conversation, and I'm glad that at least one of the towns was represented. But hopefully, as we keep this on the agenda and develop it over time, we'll have more input, not just a letter, but we're trying to respond to a letter.
Oh, right, I understand, but what I can't figure out is how they managed to come to the meeting, because usually people don't go through our meeting committee and decide because of an agenda item to show up, so I figured someone must have invited them, right?
No one invited them except we invited all. No one had a private conversation,
No, I'm not
nor
saying-
would I, And I'm glad that Barbara showed up because it clearly affects her town. And she, I know, had a conversation with the selectmen of Bridgewater, so I guess it was in her mind to pay attention to the agenda.
Can I,
Okay, I just find that hard to believe, 'cause I don't believe anybody pays attention to our agendas except for us.
I agree.
I don't think, unless someone else, I don't think there was a special invitation. They came, maybe because it was the annual budget meeting and they were looking, I have no idea. But we did discuss in the Finance Committee meeting how we felt that it would be beneficial to have all three first selects and board, whether it's Board of Finance or whomever, board people together at the same time to talk about it, instead of, in pieces and an email here and a conversation there. We did say that we would like to do that in the future.
Yeah, just to second Mr. Brown's concern, I think it's wonderful that you reached out to the first selectman. And I also think it's wonderful if you're thinking of including the boards of finance from the 3 member towns. But I think just reaching out by publishing it in your agenda items might not be enough. My suggestion would be for the next time that you send an email, make a phone call, somehow reaching out a little bit more than that, just because I think people are busy, and that isn't something that I'm sure the first selectmen are thinking about, looking at the finance committee's upcoming agenda as a normal course of business. It might be Ms. Henry was able to do that, or just thought about doing that, since we've been having lots of conversations involving our town. But I'm not sure if obviously the other 2 selectmen didn't know about it, or if they found out about it, maybe it was too last minute for them to go.
Well, if I could respond, at the time that Mr. Reed, I believe was our last meeting, April 7th, read his letter to us, I said, well, we could put this on the agenda along with the tuition conversation for our next Finance Committee meeting. So there was some comment about it then, when he was here. And I'm talking about, the issue here is, it's not Board of Finance people, it would be boards of selectmen. The ball is in their court. And I think, frankly, it's the beginning of a conversation that's going to take some time. And indeed, the Finance Committee might not be the proper placement for this, but this is what I offered at that time as the beginning of a conversation in connection also with tuition. So
Yeah, I'm
no one
not-
invited specifically. I frankly was very, like right now, I'm quite surprised that the Bridgewater selectmen aren't here.
Well, I think, again, my only suggestion is just trying to keep those lines of communication open. I'm not suggesting that you were doing something nefarious, if that's what you think that by our questionings we're suggesting. I'm not. I think it would be, if you feel that it's important enough that you're reaching out, just that extra step of an email or a phone call, because obviously you had it in your mind that they were going to be coming, and somehow that communication was lost there. So just a suggestion for the next time.
The same thing with tuition too, especially since it was brought up by Carolyn, and she's not here. But we did discuss it, and I know we'll discuss it more.
All right, any other questions for Valerie? No? Okay. Long-range planning, Alan?
Oh, yeah, we haven't met since the last, we haven't met since I last reported on our meetings. We're going to be meeting on the 10th, which is next Wednesday, and I imagine we'll be covering more of the panorama surveys and talking more about IB.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Alan? Valerie?
When can we expect a presentation on the panorama survey? Because I'm really interested in knowing what's going on there.
That's, hopefully that's what we're going to find out in the long-range planning committee meeting. Karen Files is handling all that information, and I'd imagine if we talk about it then that we can perhaps schedule a presentation for, I don't know, to see what the schedule is like for the 15th, but at one meeting before the end of the year would be good. Maybe the...
Alan, we were going to talk about it at the State of the Schools,
Oh,
because the administrative team has reviewed all of the information and has made an action plan for each school although it's broad at this point, but different steps that need to be taken for improvement based on the data that we've collected. So you'll get some information. I don't know if it'll be as in-depth as you'd like, and we can do it again, but definitely on June 12th, you'll get some information.
Thank you. June 12th, BOE. All right. No other questions, negotiations? Greg?
We have started the process to negotiate with the nurses bargaining unit, and we are in the process of trying to schedule our first meeting. And as soon as we have that down, we'll be there. It should be the third week in May, sometime around then is when we'll actually start talking.
All right. Thank you. And everything else is concluded? May, next week. Okay. Any questions? All right. Policy. We are meeting in 2 weeks, and we did not meet last month. Thank you to Alan and Michael for carrying on the policies on our last agenda. I saw some were moved forward, some moved back, and one will be on our agenda for tonight. So we'll carry on with that unless anyone has questions for policy. No? All right. Oh, I should also report that the treasurer, the policy about the treasurer was brought back to Bob Geeson, and Valerie have reviewed that to make sure that the rest of the policy reflects what is actually happening. We will be reviewing that in the policy committee and bringing that back to the board. So thank you for catching the rest of that policy, because it was just the amount that it sort of flagged that policy as being out of what we're currently out of our current operation. So no other questions? All right, we'll move on to old business 7.1, second reading, policy 5141.25, students with special dietary needs.
Do you want a motion?
Sure.
I'd like to move for second reading.
All right, Valerie moved, Rebecca seconds. I guess because I was not there for the last conversation, I mean, I can give sort of the overview. This was the policy that is mandated, and we decided to add to our policy book instead of replace, because it dealt with allergies, and that is such an important topic that we felt that we wanted to keep this policy, as well as our previous policy for students with other special dietary needs. Were there any questions or concerns about the second reading? I'm pretty sure, from my understanding, this second reading, there were no changes requested between the first and second readings. Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. All right. No questions? All right. All in favor of policy 5141.25 for a second reading, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Abstain? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, 7.2, requested by Alan, a discussion of the tuition change. And I guess maybe we could start the conversation with the conversation that we had in the Finance Committee.
Thanks.
Is that all right?
Yeah, and this is one of those other promised things that we were going to do in finance to just start the ball rolling and being, I think, respectful of the people who have suggested we make a change. We started the conversation. Basically, we think that there's so many strata of tuition right now in the district. Non-resident, $7,500. A Sherman contract, we have 3 years of history, and the Sherman contract needs to be renegotiated and is up July 1st, in which we charge Sherman $12,582, which includes a bus. So that negotiation is going to start and could get a little dicey, because we definitely want to encourage Sherman to send students, number one. Number two, to pay fairly substantially for the pleasure of being up here. Then we have the REACH program. Resident rates are half-day, $900, extended day, $1,500, non-resident, half-day, $3,750, extended day for REACH, $7,500. There are just so many different areas of tuition right now, and then the overlay of the requested $5,500, and how that $5,500 might or might not have impact on the other ranges of tuition and the Sherman contract. So, and also the fact is we want to do something that we can bring kids in from other districts, but how to make sure that we are attempting to fill unused capacity instead of incurring additional costs, which is a whole other conversation. So, well, we haven't made any decision. We're going to keep studying this. This is the first time we were presented with information, and we have to formulate timing and whether this will be workable. And we had one inference that the request for $5,500 was for all grades, including high school. And we know our population has said, our taxpayers, that we pay in excess of $27,000 a year per kid. Bob is now preparing a per facility accounting of how much it costs to run Burnham, Booth, WPS. Very important information for us to look at. So basically, we are gathering information, and we're working hard on this conversation because I know it's important to everyone in the elementary school level, if not for the entire district. And this would not be exclusively, certainly, for one town. It's got to be equal for all three towns, where capacity and tipping point become a little bit more of an issue. So that's where we are now. We'll just continue to study it and give it as much attention as we can. Just bear in mind the Sherman contract gets ticklish by July.
Rebecca?
Valerie, I don't know if you know this number yet, or if it's something that maybe you're going to be looking into, but for this Sherman tuition, which also includes the bus, do we know what the cost of the bus is? So what portion of that $12,000 and change goes towards the payment of a bus, where the cost of tuition per student out of region would not count a bus?
Give me 1 second.
Sure.
While you're looking for
Sure.
we also have an additional range of tuition in which our staff members can bring their kids here for 5% of $7,500, which is like $300. And we also want to see what the kids that are tuitioned in, the number. And Pat told us that we're looking at 26 kids entering next year from Sherman.
From Sherman, yes.
From Sherman. 7 kids in general paying $7,500.
That's all 4 grades.
Seven.
And then we have 8 staff
Right.
children, once again, paying the lowest amount. So you can see how we have this incredible range.
The
But yes,
Sherman is over the 4 years. I just want to clarify. I'm not sure, but it's, do you know how many are coming in? The last I heard, it was about 6 or 7, but I don't. Yeah, so I can get you exact number, but it's not 26.
No, that's existing and to come.
That's right, that'll be
Exiting.
next year,
The net.
9 to 12.
And I had a follow-up question. You had mentioned a concern about filling available space versus a tipping point and incurring costs. Is that not within our control to turn people away if we reach a tipping point? So that's really not something we actually need to be concerned about. We just need to identify it and then be willing to say, we're at capacity.
We
Is that
actually could do
correct?
that through Pat Now. I believe we had a guideline a while back of 24 kids, but we might want to change that guideline to say 20 kids, but it's got to be the action of the board
Sure.
to help Pat make that determination.
But we shouldn't have to worry about incurring costs. We just have to make the decision on where that tipping point is and then be comfortable with it
Exactly.
and draw that line.
Exactly.
Okay.
The number you were looking for is a little over $52,000. what ends up happening is we take in all the revenue, okay, and their revenue is reduced for the year by that amount of money, irrespective of how many students there could be. And then that balance is, in fact, part of the revenue going back to the towns. We don't get any benefit to the board itself.
Are there other, sorry, I forgot I have a job. I was crunching some numbers.
All right,
Fun.
so that's, just have to slice through some of this here. I don't think it's as complicated as Valerie thinks it is or has made it out to be. So we can clear through some of this. As Rebecca said, the tipping point is covered by the policy, which was either in effect, or we put in effect last time. We dropped the non-resident rate for all grades to 7,500, which gave the superintendent the wherewithal to be able to discern where the kids were going and to refuse kids based on, if 30 kids decided they wanted to go to Roxbury's fourth grade, obviously that would be something that the superintendent would be in charge of making sure didn't happen. So the tipping point isn't an issue. Sherman is, the request for the reduced rate was for the elementary schools only. So Reach and Sherman are not involved in this at all. The aspect of the staff getting 5% would imply then that since we've done that as a matter of covering materials, I believe, for the staff, which is why we arrived at such a low number to begin with, the staff is 5% would be 5% of 7,500 for for the reduced rate as non-residents for 6 through 12, and would be 5% of the reduced rate for elementary schools. I want to point out also that I don't know how many, it's funny because I have to talk about this in public very often, but I'm actually going to tear off my clothes and run screaming around here if I have to do this again in front of this board. The public might lag behind us a little bit, but the board should know this once and for all. Our per pupil rate of $27,000 has nothing to do with what we pay to educate a child here as far as a taxpayer. A taxpayer pays property taxes, and in most of these towns, their property taxes, pretty much 3/5 of their property taxes go to the education budget. If you live in a mansion and have no kids, you're paying probably, I don't know, maybe $30,000 to educate nobody. If you live in a tiny little house and pay $4,000 worth of taxes and have 6 kids, you're actually paying $4,000 to educate 6 kids. So we really have to stop talking about any kind of tuition rate as being in any way related to our per pupil costs. That's an entirely different number. And it drives me nuts when we talk about this because this comes up every once in a while, and it is our job to educate people in the public who are confused about this, not to be confused about this ourselves. And then finally, Curtis had the first selectman of Bridgewater, Curtis Reed, had a conversation with Dave Grombeck, which was a really great conversation. He is the mayor of New Milford. And in the past, we've had some issues of people, especially I think the superintendent of schools in New Milford, saying, "Oh, well, you're trying to poach kids from our school system." And Dave Grombeck actually said, that's not so bad because we have our own issues with, moving kids around. So that's great if you want to do that. He said, but what's interesting though is I think that, it's just too expensive. And if you could get the rate down to $2,500, you would really see something from New Milford kids. And Curtis said, well, that's really impossible, obviously. But then he thought about it. And the town is going to put in $1,500 and the PTO is going to put in $1,000. So that if we're actually going to ask for a reduced rate for elementary schools only of $5,000, which means that in Bridgewater at least we could supplement that and be able to have kids come to Burnham, which is where our population trouble is the greatest as it is. We could offer the incentives so that they could actually put their kids in for $2,500. And part of the issue is there are a couple of different issues. One is that Carolyn Dwyer ran into the situation of Kathy being called by people who had multiple children. They wanted to obviously put all their kids in Burnham. If they have 3 kids, and that starts to be quite a ticket. And with 3 kids, and it would end up being, if it's down for their pockets, $2,500, it would therefore be $7,500 for a family. The other issue that we've also talked about in the past is the aspect of other towns and other selectmen I think it's up to those towns to decide if they want to participate or not. They certainly don't need to at the moment because they're not suffering the depleted class populations that Burnham is. But once again, it's always up to the towns if they want to do that and to supplement or not. And it's always up to the superintendent to make sure that if people expect to be able to do this to WPS classes, that those aren't available, because that's what our policy says. But finally, what everyone has to remember is that even if they don't choose to participate, if we end up at $5,000 for every child who comes in to Burnham or anywhere, but since we're focusing on Burnham, Bridgewater gets $1,030 back, which helps us offset the incentives. Roxbury gets $1,680 back, and Washington gets $2,290 back. So this is kind of a win-win for everybody. This is going to offset costs for all towns, regardless of whether they participate or not, and certainly offset our costs, and certainly obviously do us a favor as far as being able to populate the classes. So with that in mind, I'd like to make a motion to reduce the tuition for the elementary schools, K-5 only, to $5,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Michael second. Valerie?
Well, we just can't, maybe the town of Bridgewater, and I do sympathize, and we're trying to give attention not only to this request, but we're working on the reconfiguration request. So we're kind of bouncing around a lot. Are we looking at a reconfiguration? Are we looking at just tuitioning in? We're doing everything we can, I think, to accommodate Mr. Reed's request of us. But we can't just snap our fingers and make these things happen. Certainly in terms of reconfiguration, that is a legal question. So we just found that out, and we have court case, and we have to talk about that, and we have to have conversation with the, believe it or not, 2 other towns in the region. The question about what does it really cost to educate our kids, I'm right in the middle of getting a lot of flack from the town of Washington, we all are, that they are bandying around figures, and as much as you say to them, well, that's a math problem. That's just simple, here's the budget, here are the kids. And in some schools, it's as much as $37,000 a kid, just plain math, how many kids and in that school and how much does it cost to run that school. But it's still a reality to taxpayers out there that we pay a lot, unspecified if you will, to educate our kids. And that's the luxury of our small school system and our declining enrollment, and you still have to have a building, and you still have to have, by statute, 3 elementary schools, which no one's arguing right now, and it's still something that has to be considered for the taxpayer. I'm not saying $5,500 is a bad idea. Now it's $5,000, I guess. I don't know. All I know is parity, fairness, at a time when we are going to be negotiating with Sherman, and I'm not saying we have to kick this can down the road very far, but we've got to be mindful of our larger and long-standing obligations, because we're going to take, just probably incur some big losses if Sherman says, I'm not going to pay $12,000 in a bus and get a bus when I can go $5,000. And I do think this board has to have guidelines first before we just suddenly drop our tuition. If it's about timing, and I'm not trying to stall, and it's not my decision anyway. I'm just presenting you that the other side of the region has other issues and wants to do the best for the total, but they think they're spending a lot of money per kid, and $5,000 or $5,500 or $4,500 isn't going to do it. If we can get to that number quickly, I'm all for it. I have no dog in this fight except just wanting to do the right thing and being consistent. But I don't want to lose Sherman.
Pete?
Well, I'm not in favor of this. I would imagine if you ever told the Washington taxpayers we were charging $5,500 tuition in people, you'd never pass a budget, ever, because you need Washington to pass all your budgets. I guarantee you, you never get a Region 12 budget through the doors. I understand Alan's position. I understand Bridgewater's problems. We offered the solution to that problem. They rejected it. That's their problem. That's not my problem. You were offered a solution to all your financial problems, all your educational problems, and you can't get over that hurdle. That's your problem, not mine, and not the taxpayers in Washington, Connecticut. You have to face reality. You have to face the fact people are not moving into your town. Families are not moving into your town. There's a reason. You have to discover what that reason is. Many of us know what that reason is. You're not a neighborhood anymore. People are not moving into a town that isn't a neighborhood. Same with Roxbury. Even Washington's having the same problem. It's not that we don't sympathize with you, but we offered a financial solution worth $30, $40 million. You rejected it. There's a price to pay for that reduction. So you have to face that. I know it's difficult. I know it sounds tough. It sounds hard. It doesn't sound fair maybe to you, but I doubt you could present this to a meeting in Washington, Connecticut, and get the taxpayers to support this. I really do. And you need Washington to pass your budgets. You need the town of Washington to pass budgets in Region 12. And I can guarantee you'll never pass a budget.
Craig?
Well, I just want to make sure I understand this economically. It seems to me if you have excess capacity, and if your budget is $21 million, and you bring in 10 kids through a reduced tuition. Now, first of all, it doesn't matter whether tuition is $5,000 or $50,000 a kid. Region 12 doesn't see a penny of that tuition. It goes right to the towns. So it's not going to affect the budget. You know, you could have this program, and you could bring in as many kids as you want, and your budget's going to remain $21 million until you reach the threshold where you actually have to hire more teachers, and you have increased cost. But right now, if you brought in 10 kids and they were equally distributed across the grades, just 10 kids into Burnham alone, and they were equally distributed across the grades, you're not going to hire another teacher. If the cost of running the school is 10, the cost of running the school after the addition of those kids is 10. Nothing's changed. So, Pete, the problem is that I understand that people look at a per pupil expenditure number and they say it's costing you a lot of money to run the show. But we're always looking at, unfortunately, that's the wrong metric. The question is, what does it really cost to run the show? And if anybody that wants to look at what the per pupil expenditure is looking at a meaningless number in a region this small, they should be really dividing that school budget into their grand list and figuring out what the impact on taxation is, not what the impact on the cost per kid in the school. And if you do that, what you discover is that there are probably only about 10 towns in Connecticut that have a lower tax burden than the 3 towns in this region. So the difficulty is nobody wants to believe that because they write the check for their taxes, and it hurts. And believe me, it does when you on the 2 days of the year when you write it. But the fact of the matter is, reducing this cost does not increase our budget or our costs of operating the elementary schools as long as we don't go up against that number where we've used up all of our excess capacity. And my guess is we got a long way to go. You'd have to get to the point where you needed a 5th teacher in Bridgewater or another teacher in Roxbury or another teacher in Washington before you reach that tipping point. And I think that would be a nice problem to have, is if we got to that point. But I don't think we're going to have that problem because, frankly, I think reducing it to 5,000, it's going to bring in a few kids, but it's not going to bring in a lot of kids. And so I really don't see this as being something that hurts the region. It doesn't increase the budget. It doesn't increase costs, and we should be able to explain it by explaining the concept of excess capacity, because that's exactly what we're dealing with right now, is it costs us the same either way, especially at Burnham, where we've now reduced the cost to about as low as it can get. Suppose you could go down to the point where you only needed 2 teachers for 2 grades. But the bottom line is it's hard to envision how this is a budget buster. It isn't. And if people don't want to understand that, then we have not done our job of educating them of how it impacts their taxes.
Are there any other comments? Jen?
I actually Thank you for saying that, Greg, because I feel like that helps to put it in perspective. I am in support of the lowering the tuition. I just feel personally that out of respect for the selectman of my town, that I would like to have him weigh in. I think it's important for me to hear what Mark has to say, regardless, because I just think it's important. We've heard Curtis, and I haven't even heard Barbara, but I don't represent Roxbury. So I just think, for me, out of courtesy for Mark, I'd like to have some input from him before just deciding this. That's just my 2 cents.
Michael?
I know it is a difficult concept. I think if some of us on the board are struggling with understanding the finances, part of our challenge is also educating the selectmen, educating the public to show that this is not actually increasing the burden, but far from it. It's enhancing income for the towns, for all 3 towns. I mean, unless I'm totally misunderstanding the presentation, this is money that would get returned directly to the towns, and that benefits the taxpayer directly. So it's not a difficult concept. We have fixed costs. Those fixed costs are sometimes human costs, the teacher. Sometimes they're items like electricity, whether we are at capacity in terms of our students or we only have 100 students in our buildings. We have the same cost for electricity. We have the same cost for heat. Those are fixed costs. And so as long as we're not hiring extra teachers willy-nilly, which I don't think is a realistic scenario, and even if it did happen, we've got a tripwire in place so that would never, ever happen without our consent to it happening. So to me, it seems like a no-brainer. We've said as a board over and over again, we are concerned not just with Bridgewater, but with all 3 towns with declining enrollment. That's something every member of this board, as far as I can tell, is in favor of. So why are we hesitating? I'm just puzzled.
Jen?
All I'm saying is I'd like to hear from my first selectman before I vote. I'm not saying I'm against it. I just would like to hear, because I know that in the past he's had some reservations, and I would just like to be respectful and hear him. That's it.
But it might be that you need to educate
Yeah.
as well.
That's fine, and maybe him coming or having the conversation, regardless, for me, that I will not vote for it until I at least hear him weigh in, and I don't think that that's an unreasonable request. I don't think we need to do everything today because everybody thinks certain people think it's important. I think it needs to be, for me, I'm not going to vote for it unless I hear from Mark, period.
Alan?
I just want to point out to Pete that this is a good thing because the town of Washington will get $2,290 for every kid that comes in, and as
I understand.
as Greg pointed out, it's completely separate from the budget. And Jen, I just want to say that I appreciate your wanting to abstain, I imagine, but the point is that this was brought to our attention February 27th. So you had 2 months to talk to Mark about it. And all you have to do is go in tomorrow and tell him, look, for every student that comes to Burnham, your town gets $2,290. Hooray. He'll be fine, really.
I appreciate you speaking on his behalf,
Okay.
but I have talked to him, and so I would like him to have the opportunity, if he would like, to come here to speak.
I know, but it's...
So again, I'm
here's the
just
thing.
saying, I don't think we need to speak on his behalf, and I appreciate you
all right,
saying that,
well,
but I think he should be the one to say that.
All right, well, what I'm saying is it's been 2 months already, 2 months and 3 days, and so I appreciate you're not wanting to vote, and that's okay, but the point is, we need to get this out there so that we can have people plan for next year, and if it were that important, then someone should have talked to him before. But as I said, it's a matter of making sure that we can get this done expediently.
All right. I think Greg, then Valerie, and then Pete.
Do we know, I'm sorry, I missed the number of how many students we have tuitioned at the $7,500 number into our elementary schools. Is it 10?
No.
It's 7, and next year we have one in Booth Free. The rest are all at Chippewa. So there is
Chippewa?
at Chapag. So next year, we have 7 students who are tuitioning in at $7,500. 1 student is in booth free, and 6 are at Chapag. 0 at Washington, and 0 at Burnham.
Valerie?
Yeah, let's get this on the agenda for the next meeting. Let's actually post it as an agenda item so that our selectmen can show up, including Barbara, because it wasn't really our conversation tonight with her. We were still working on the request for reconfiguration, which, once again, we were batted back and forth, this board. We are the Board of Ed. We are Region 12. We're responsible for all these kids and this faculty and these buildings. And every time Bridgewater First Selectman shows up, we go in this direction, and then we go in that direction. And frankly, this should have been noticed on an agenda item, so indeed our selectmen can show up. And this would be a good responsibility for the boards of finance to show up, because they're on the front line of that conversation, whether we put credence in it or not. It costs a hell of a lot of money to educate our kids, and it's far in excess of $5,000 each. We know that. So let's have this conversation, not just dropped on us last minute on an agenda item. If it means that much, let's do it. Why didn't you get it on the agenda before? You were in the town. You could have asked Pat to put it on, or Debbie to put it on the agenda a week, 2 weeks ago. All I know is it was on my agenda, and we gave it a hearing, and we got our information, and I'm glad we did, so we can make an informed decision. To fly off the handle without information is ridiculous, and I think it's very important we don't push aside the Sherman issue, which has to be negotiated. They're not dumb. They're going to see that they can send their kids here for $5,000 instead of $12,582. That's kind of an important income stream, and it's a very important part of the population here up at the Hill. I think, let's put it on the agenda and give it a hearing. Next meeting, what's the problem? 2 weeks hence.
Pete, did you still have?
Well, let Alan, he's got his hand up.
Because 2 weeks would make it a full 10 weeks since this was introduced.
They're working on
And-
configuration.
No, we should be able to do more than one thing at a time. This came long before. And finally, Valerie, there is no problem with Sherman. Sherman does not send anyone other than 9th through 12th graders here. And this is for K through 5th graders. And there's a 6 through 8 gap in between. Please do not conflate this. I'm glad that you discussed this in your meeting today, but it seems like all the information you were looking for I have just provided you with. So if the motion on the floor, I'd like to vote and make this happen so that we can market this during this month when people are choosing to send their kids to schools when and where they want to for the next year.
So that brings me to my question, because I understand the excess capacity, and I'm even though the optics of it are sometimes difficult to explain, it makes sense, and so I have no problem with the tuition being lowered. However, I want to just talk a little bit about the Sherman contract, because that I am concerned about. I was doing some math when Rebecca asked about the bus. With 26 students next year, that's $312,000. So that's I don't want to put that at risk in the hopes of gaining elementary students. So if I have this correctly, the proposal is K5 would be 5,000. 6, 7, 8 would remain at 7,500. Is that correct? And then the high school is negotiated either through Sherman or.
Well, I would imagine that we had a 7,500 blanket from K to 12, and we'd keep 7,500 unless you wanted to raise it, I suppose. But 7,500 would be the same rate from 6 to 12, but we're dropping from K5 to 5. That's all. That's the only difference. So really, Sherman is not negotiating anything different than they are now, because the students that they send here would be already negotiated against the 7,500, which has been in place for, I think, 2.5 or 3 years now.
Right. All right. That makes sense. I get that. I guess my only we'll be voting on this, I guess, shortly. My request, I guess, would be that we are sensitive, because I understand Bridgewater wants to promote, you know, get going, because they're looking for students. Well, we all are, but because we're going into the negotiations with Sherman, even though this is not a proposed change for the middle high school tuition, it's still out there. So I would request that any promotional material, I'm nervous about waving the $5,000 flag all through the papers right before we're about to go into negotiations with Sherman. So does that make sense? I mean, I understand, you know, promoting, you know, space available, come visit our school, and then once a contact has been made, you know, letting that be known. I don't know, I'm just trying to process and think that through.
But Sherman shouldn't care about elementary school.
No, they shouldn't.
No, but it's a tuition in the district, and we have, as Valerie mentioned, quite a few different tuitions. So I think it plays in. I think Pete had his hand up first, and then Mike.
I would suggest that Alan hold a Washington town meeting and explain to the town taxpayers his proposal. I'm really serious about that. I'm telling you, you're going to get blown up. Once I don't care how you configure that, Alan.
They get money.
You can't use a figure of 5,500 when our figures are what, 31,000, 27,000, depending on who you speak to. You can't throw a number out that to the public and think that they're going to buy it, when the other numbers that they're underwriting per student cost of education are much higher. I understand where you're coming from. I understand what you're trying to do, trying to fill a school building. I don't think you can get away with that number, 5,500.
I think it's, I think
Whatever
the
it is,
proposal's
in our
5,000,
town.
but wait, okay, Pete, Michael had his hand up.
Greg,
I'm not against it, I'm just telling you.
Could I just, Pete, it's very simple. It's very simple. And this is not a perfect analogy, but it's a close one. You got two people riding in your car, and you're going to church, all right, or you're going to school. You decide to add a third person to the car. Your costs don't increase by 50%. Your costs increase by virtually nothing, except for the fact that the car uses just a little bit of extra gasoline. But these are little first graders, okay? So it doesn't use very much because you're not going that far. So the bottom line is you could put 3 kids in that car and you're still costing the same to drive down to school. And that's all there is to it. It doesn't change your cost of operations. It doesn't, you still got to drive there. And therefore, the per pupil expenditure is irrelevant for the purposes of figuring out the impact of adding a few kids. Now, there is a little bit of a fiscal impact because you're going from 7,500 to 5,000. But I'm telling you, if you've got 7 kids at 7,500 and you picked up 4 kids, you'd actually have more money at 5,000 for 11 kids than you would for 7 kids at 7,500. So there really is, and that's such a minor, tiny impact to the overall budgetary thing. It doesn't really make sense. But the bottom line is this doesn't increase costs to have 7,500, 5,000. Take your pick. It doesn't increase the cost of the region in any material respect.
You want you to turn back? Okay.
I just wanted to address your concern that you had about going, and Valerie, you had mentioned this too, about going into negotiations with Sherman. I think whenever we're entering into negotiations with any group, whether it's a union here in district or with an outside group, there should be, I think, a certain level of concern because we want to have a strong negotiating stance. So I understand where you're coming from. I think if we're looking at it logically, though, if we're looking at it from Sherman's perspective, they're already saying to themselves, well, we're spending $2,500, and I think they already have a policy on the book that says that other students can come for $7,500, so why are we spending more? And I think part of our rationale, obviously, is the bus that we're providing, and I'm sure that that's going to be part of the presentation that we make to them, that there's a fixed cost, and we're building that into what we're charging you. But, you know, I think part of what we need to do is look at what do other districts in the area charge high school students for districting in. So in other words, when we're going into negotiations with Sherman, my suggestion would be looking at the other districts that Sherman is sending their kids to. Okay. What does New Fairfield charge them? What does New Milford charge them? And once we have that information, I think you'll be more confident, hopefully, entering into negotiations.
Yeah, we asked for that at the Finance Committee meeting because we knew that would be important. Stephanie, you had your hand up at one point.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Okay, so one, as I understand it, the whole cost of the tuition now, the $7,500, goes directly to the towns, doesn't go to the school board. So why do we set that number at all? And I guess to follow that up, since, you know, this is going to affect the towns, essentially it doesn't affect us as much. Why was it set at $7,500? And, you know, if we can lower it to $5,000, and I love the idea, then why couldn't we lower it more? Like, what is that number attached to? Why did we say $7,500? Because that makes sense, because. And lowering it to $5,000 does what? What does that affect for the towns and us? And I guess it doesn't affect us, is what I'm understanding.
Mm.
And then if someone after that could explain to me exactly what the Sherman contract is, and I'm assuming that only goes to high school. And for me, as a negotiation tactic, if I understood, even though elementary school wouldn't affect me at all, if you're so desperate for students that you're willing to lower it by a certain percentage, then I could say you're also desperate for students, so why would I'm not going to negotiate against myself and go any higher. So I understand the relationship there, but I'm sorry, that's like a multi-pronged question, and it's really displaying my experience.
The first part is easy. The first part was relatively simply that we used to have a calculated price of around $14,000, $15,000,
Sit next to me.
$15,000 for tuition and students, and we simply dropped it in half to make it more attractive and more manageable for people a couple of years ago in order to make it more enticing. And unfortunately, what we've discovered, though, is that, as you can tell from what Dr. Cosentino has said, it's not enticing enough because we only have, you know, one kid, and then, of course, it does help a little bit with Chippewa. It's not enticing enough because, at least on the elementary school level, and it's probably true for K-12, there are a lot of parochial schools in the area that are very inexpensive due to their subsidies. And dropping it further helps us compete with them, because I think a lot of like St. Joe's and St. Nick's and St. Rose's, they're all about 5,000 or so. And then they have discounts for multiple students, which is where we're coming at to lower it even further. As far as why we can't lower it even further, I suppose we could, but that would be even more, I guess, you know, we could love to lower it even further, but then look how hard it is just lowering it this far.
Well, so who, like, I don't understand why we set it at $7,500 at all. Like, what is that number attached to?
It's
like what?
It's arbitrary. It was 50%.
It was arbitrary
It was
to begin with.
arbitrarily
Oh.
50% of the previous rate, which was 15,000.
And do we not offer one of those, like most private schools would, a reduced tuition for second, third kids or something like that?
Well,
That's not on the.
that was the question when Carolyn Dwyer brought this to the board on the 27th of February, and they made her choose, well, which would you want? I forget who had asked her, so which do you want? Do you want, you know, what you want, reduction for second and third kid, or do you just want the price dropped? And she was like, I would prefer, you know, she had to pick one as a priority. We'll just drop the price. So this way, you know, it works out well. If you have one kid, it ends up being $2,500 after our subsidies. And if you have three kids, it's $7,500, which is the equivalent of having a big discount if you have three kids or so. As your other question, as far as Sherman doesn't have a high school of its own. It's only a K-8 school. So they negotiate with each school system that they send to. And I think there was talk about adding Brookfield this year. I don't know whether that went on or not, but it's New Fairfield and Danbury and New Milford and Chippewa and Chippewa. I was going to say Region 12. Not Danbury?
I don't think it's Danbury.
Who else? Is it just three of us then? New Milford, New Fairfield, and Chippewa? Oh, those three. Okay. And Housatonic? Is it?
Should be straight.
Anyway, those are all set up in terms of a negotiation between the school systems, as opposed to this, which is more of a, not even negotiation, it's a price set for a family, a parent, and the school system. So what you have with Sherman is you have a situation where not having a high school, they're kind of in a different situation. If you think about it, the rate that they pay to put a student in here is not over and above what they're already paying for their infrastructure to educate their kids in their high school, because they don't have a high school. So every amount that they pay is, you know, close to whatever the other schools are that they pay, and that's what the negotiation is, and that's why the talk turned to, you know, a comparable rate between the schools. So that contract is negotiated because that rate is set for whichever number of kids come from that school system, plus we pay for the busing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so their elementary school students are obviously welcome to come to our elementary.
Oh, they are
just
too,
like
yeah.
Milford is. and
They are
have their
too.
own
Any,
schools
yeah,
and stuff.
anybody is.
Don't.
It's just that they just don't, and they are, I guess they're happy with their K-8, so they don't usually send their kids anywhere. But they would be invited to too, if at the potentially specially reduced rate of 5,000. But as soon as they get out of the fifth grade, they would then have to go back to Sherman for 3 years. And then they could come back here for the special rate of whatever is negotiated next year.
So sorry, one last question, just since I have the. So the towns then, each town had no part in play in setting that original 7,500.
No, no. Bridgewater, town of Bridgewater requested it based on being able to be more attractive to incoming students to Burnham. And as I said, because you know we get very pent up about this on the board, but nobody really complains because they get money. The other towns get money. But you're right, the towns are the recipients of this, but they had no, they did not weigh in last time either.
Got it. Thanks.
I
Thank
wanted
you.
to just point out one difference, which Alan sort of mentioned, but just to make it clear, so the Sherman, that negotiated tuition, the town is paying that. The tuition we're talking about, the parents are paying. So
Yeah, but, okay.
so it's and it is a very important distinction between the two, and I believe Sherman understands that. Valerie, you had something?
Yeah, that 15,000 wasn't just arbitrary. I mean, that was based on, years ago, the average cost of educating a child. When my husband and I were in Woodbury, we called and had a long and involved conversation with then Superintendent Nicoletti, and we were supposed to pay $15,000 a year. That's the set, and that's the understanding. So then we tried to make our facility more attractive, and we cut it to $7,500 against a lot of concern by taxpayers. And we have now 7 kids at $7,500, and that's all wonderful, fine, and good. But it's still decreasing our essential cost, our average cost of educating kids. And we could just open the doors and say, for the sake of empty seats, please come in. And then guess what? We are subsidizing 100% or 80% or 60% of these children's education by our taxpayers. That's why we have regions, so that each taxpayer grouping is handling the education of their own population. We are trying and going out of our way by decreasing that 15,000 to 7,500 and now to 5,500, 5,000, whatever Bridgewater wants, we will give. And disregarding the essential question of the taxpayers in 3 towns are paying for the education of whom? And that's the big criticism of Ag STEM, is that we're going to have kids here taking advantage of us and our taxpayer dollars for what? We know for what. We understand that and we can answer that easily, because we also know there's going to be income coming in, but not to offset everything. We know that. This is kind of a calculated plan on our part. But we can't just open our doors and say, okay, now it's 2,000, it's 5,000, it's 4,000, it's nothing. Taxpayers living and breathing here, you and I, are subsidizing the education of our kids, which is our duty and obligation, not other kids. Having said that, we are open to accept whoever would like to come, but we would like to have a fairly minimal contribution to that effort. And as Pete said, if you want that conversation in the town of Washington, have at it. Because the town of Washington will not pass this budget, and we'll be sitting here until June 30th if we do this tonight without more information and more input. And I mean that sincerely, because we, four who are running to retain our seats, however empty they are, have heard this again and again and again. This is a subject that means a lot to taxpayers, and they'll be more than happy to vote down our budgets because of it. Because they see number of kids divided into 21 million is approximately 30,000, 37,000, we think. Numbers will be developed by our next finance meeting. And they're paying so much money, it's ridiculous. You've talked a great long time, and you answered a question without being recognized, so just sit there and be quiet. Just sit there and be quiet, because this is body and soul important to this region, that whenever a certain town says, do this and do this now, we say, sure, without thinking about everyone else. I'm not saying don't do this, just don't do this now until we know how our other taxpayers, i.e. the Board of Finance, Town of Washington, Board of Finance, Town of Roxbury, Board of Finance, Town of Bridgewater, think about this. We can act. No one's saying this isn't in our power, but we have to be every now and then respectful of the taxpayer and not just go off. That $7,500 that we sliced our $15,000, which is the norm, brought in 7 kids. I mean, you know, it's not like we're getting a big flood of people here, nor shall we probably get a big flood of people into Bridgewater, Washington, and Roxbury. And those 2 schools are part of this dynamic, and those 2 towns are part of this dynamic. So just wait until we can get more information. And if you guys want to sit here and try to figure out a new budget, because this one goes down because of this last-minute push for what was one request is now another request, and now, hey, let's just go to $4,000 and be done. I don't know where we are in this. It could possibly be, and it's not a goddamn laughing matter. Sorry for the language, but I've had it with us bending to Bridgewater's requests, and when they say jump, we ask how high. There are 2 other towns here. Barbara Henry was sitting in our meeting. We didn't get into this issue as much as I would like to see. She was not a happy camper, but it's up to her to talk to her representatives on the board to discuss these issues. Jen said she'd like the luxury, please, of listening to what our Board of Selectmen feel about this, and maybe do a little pre-teaching on this, and then we'll vote, and then it'll be fine. But just to say, boom, let's do it tonight, at a number not quite sure, we have a responsibility to taxpayers. I know you don't like that idea, but we do. Otherwise, we're not going to be sitting here anymore. I mean, those taxpayers push down an operating budget too often, we got nothing, and our kids suffer. We should be looking out for our kids.
Alan?
I think that was an awful lot of words, but they followed something very important that Valerie said to start out with, which is I'm glad to see she actually supports this, because if you support Ag STEM, then clearly you support this, because the idea of our subsidizing other people's kids in order to make our classes viable is the point of all this. So there was a lot of other stuff that came after that, but I think that's the essential point, is that we are willing as a region to embark on something which has been festooned for a long time as an investment in other people's kids so that together we can expand the viability of our kids. And this is the exact same thing. But every town gets some money doing this. So I really love it. We could vote on this and so that we can start marketing this and get some kids in next year.
Anthony, that's the first time I've seen your hand up. Sorry, Pete and Valerie. Go ahead. Anthony.
I'm uncomfortable with the spectrum of a negotiation with Sherman. And again, for me, it's just pure math. If this action plants any seeds with Sherman, let's say, for example, Michael, we go from 75 to 5, and they follow the same 2,500 trunk off their number at 24, that's $60,000. We need 12 new kids in the school to break even. And I haven't kind of thought through the dynamics of that, and we don't know what New Milford's charging, and which just makes me uncomfortable about making a decision tonight about this, because then we will have to be explaining to our selectmen why we did cost them money. You know, and you'd say, well, we can get the 12, and, you know, just to continue the scenario, you could say yes, but it depends on where the 12 comes from. And if the 12 comes from a place where we need to then increase another teacher, we all said earlier that the rules would be we would stop that, so then you couldn't possibly get to your 12, and we're in a net deficit position, which we will have to explain to somebody. And I'm not saying that's an explanation we couldn't make or shouldn't make for the greater good. I just think it's worthy of a deeper conversation. As much as I would like to make a decision tonight, because I do agree with Alan, I mean, it's been on the table for a long time. And it's unfortunate that we're sitting here right now and we're up against a contract renewal with Sherman. You know, and we have been very vocal about the community, and we have been very vocal about the cost of AgSTEM, and it's $6,800, but it's only the variable cost, the airplane analogy, on and on and on. If I were Sherman, I'd be paying very close attention to all of this and coming to the table saying, you're going to sharpen your pencil a little bit. So I don't think this is going to be the only thing that we need to worry about vis-a-vis Sherman, but I just feel like we'd be perhaps contributing to that, and I just would like the benefit of thinking through that a little bit more with some numbers in front of me, and anyway, that's how I feel right now. So I'm conflicted. I'm honestly conflicted about voting tonight. Not about the concept, not about whether or not it's worthwhile, not about if it's 5,000 is the right number. I just want to think through this.
I'm just going to interject here because I've been feeling the same way, and I would be more comfortable seeing this on the agenda in 2 weeks, if that's enough time. I know Jim had asked this go to the Finance Committee. We talked about it tonight. We had a lot of numbers presented to us, actually some of which I was unaware of when I was looking at the reach non-resident half-day versus extended. You know, we have a lot of tuition numbers floating out there. We, as the Finance Committee, asked Bob to get us the numbers for the tuition being paid to that Sherman pays to New Milford, New Fairfield, and whatever schools they sent to. We can't remember either. I'm also hearing what Jen said. Barbara talked a little bit about the tuition, but not a lot, because that wasn't the first thing on her mind. But I would also like to hear from Washington and Roxbury first selectmen. I think 2 weeks, we're still in May, it doesn't kill the school shopping, but, and I think I would just be more comfortable talking about this once we've gathered those other bits of information.
Okay, well,
that's my feeling. Alan?
all right, I'll withdraw my motion, but can we please make sure that we do everything before that and have our meeting with all of our information, all of our conversations and everything? Because that, as I said, that will make it 10 weeks. And I know we've been busy with other things, but it would be good if we could take care of this. But this also begs the question, when are the negotiations with Sherman?
I believe July 1.
Well.
So, expires July 1.
Expires. So we have to negotiate before that, right?
Yeah. Bob,
When are they?
Bob, how does that usually go? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The tuition you saw tonight starts July 1 of 2017, ends June 30th of 18 rather. Negotiations generally start right after the school begins.
So we're
For another, whatever the board's pleasure, Last time it was for 3
So
Oh, I
we're
thought
done.
it ended.
Yeah, they're done already.
Okay, well,
But it's when this next contract, we start negotiating again.
Yeah, but we won't have to do that for a while, though. You know,
You
it's
don't
not
have
as if
to
we're
do
doing
it,
it next
I
week or
mean,
something.
Realistically, it's when you want to start the negotiations with that respective town.
Right, but as I said, they're not happening next month. They're happening at some point in the next 6 months or so for the following year. Gotcha. I didn't realize that. So that's further off in the distance.
I've been quiet. I just want to say a couple of things. I have no problem with this motion and the idea of it. I do have a problem with a couple of things. Number one, we're always hearing that we're not transparent, we're not transparent. I think doing this without it being on the agenda for the public and the 3 towns to see is problematic. I'm very concerned about our referendum tomorrow, and I just think to do this tonight will cause undue harm for an important day where we need to be calm and we need to get out the vote. Because if our budget goes down, we are not adding any positions or money to our budget. We are taking away. And when you think about the staff, we've already today had to riff 3 people on our agenda. Do not want to have to riff more people. So as a board, I'm asking you to think regionally. Let's move this to May 15th. We can meet before then. We can have a special finance meeting. We can invite the selectmen. We can have a special board meeting to discuss it so that we're ready to vote, or you're ready to vote on May 15th. But honestly, for the benefit of our students and our staff, and to have a positive referendum tomorrow, I think it's best to just table this for 2 weeks.
Well, that's what I said. I'll withdraw my motion. I just want to make sure that, we don't just resume discussion in 2 weeks. We actually have all of the facts and numbers and opinions and conversations either before that or have everybody here to do it in person, because we can't just talk to the selectmen. We have to let them know that if they have issues like Pete had, for instance, that they're clarified the way Greg clarified them. So I'll withdraw my motion.
all right. Alan withdrew his motion. Michael withdrew his second, so.
Move to adjourn.
Hold on just a second, Valerie. I will make sure that we have the information that we wanted. I forgot about the fact that this was also not originally on the agenda, and I do think it's best that it's on a posted agenda. It was on the Finance Committee agenda, and usually the way that works is then the Finance Committee reports out to the board, and then the board takes up the matter at a future agenda. So I appreciate both Alan and Michael withdrawing that. We will put it on the next agenda. We will make sure we have the information about the tuition, and I will make sure that the boards of selectmen, boards of finance of all 3 towns are aware of this, and either invite them to that meeting or invite them to submit their feelings regarding the out-of-district tuition if they're unable to attend. We'll make sure that. We'll make sure that their input is taken. Valerie, did you?
Yeah, I just want to say that it's very important that this information go to all board members that we had at our Finance Committee, because I
Yes.
know most of you had not seen this, and it's very important because there are many levels of tuition, and indeed we might want or might not want to make some adjustments in others.
All right.
And
Bob,
we
let me
meet at
just
6:30 on the 15th?
Yes, 6:30 on the 15th. Bob, this, I believe, was an additional item not in our finance board packet, right? You handed this out tonight, are all the tuition levels?
No, but it
was in
part of the packet.
Okay, all right. I just saying, and I was going to say it's either, if it was in the packet, they've already got it, but if it wasn't in the packet.
get it to you
Okay,
again.
so we'll get that to everyone. Thank you very much. I've had one move to adjourn. Is that second? That's seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you. Don't forget
All
to
right,
vote.
good.